So Laney's there. Hey, Laney. We got the team thing set up finally in class. Okay. Is there anyone else in the chat in the class? No. Oh, Chloe's there. Okay, Chloe. Hey. Laney and Argina. Yeah, sorry, it's this one. It just the thing wasn't set up exactly, so it took forever to freaking get it going. Let me share my screen here. We're gonna be doing again. Oh, let me pull up. All right. So we're gonna do like I said last time, we're gonna start reading some of the Algerian Chronicles just for reading's sake and information's sake, and so it's something we've experienced and know about, as opposed to the parroting copy exercise we did last time. If people haven't done it's called like the Literary Vulture Camus exercise, right? The assignment there. Go back and watch the team's recording from Tuesday and complete the exercise that is outlined and done in class during that recording. If you haven't turned that in yet, because it is 10 points and it's a department level assessment that's required for the class. So if you just go in and watch like the last, I think 30 minutes of that class, or you should watch the whole thing if you weren't here. It walks you through the instructions and gives you the material you need in order to finish that exercise and get those 10 points, as well as fulfill a departmental general education level assessment. So that would be a good thing in general to do. And I mean, if you want to not have a 0 for a 10-point assignment, you got to do it. So I recommend that highly. Let me pull up the Algerian Chronicles here again. If you all have the Algerian Chronicles, like I asked you to buy, you can open up your own copy of it from home or your Kindle copy of it online. If not, I'm going to share on the screen of mine in a second here. As soon as dang it. So stupid. Thanks, Amazon. No. All right, thank God. All right, cool. Now I can share the screen. We're good. Cool. Huzzah. It should be up on all the. 1 second. Wait. Share there. Cool. All right, everybody. So now the freaking screening class is mirroring the proper screen, so we can actually read something together. and it'll be somewhat more helpful than it was a second ago. So we're going to look at, like I said, so so as I said, background about the book, as well as what it's talking about, right? So the Algerian Chronicles, right, is Albert Camus' investigative journalism, in a real sense, during what was the famine, which led to the rebellion, which led to the giving up of the colonial state of, or the colonial province of Algeria for the French, right? So there was, after World War I, before World War II, right? Algeria had contributed a lot of troops to the French war effort in World War I in the trenches in France and Germany, right? Following that, there was a famine and a drought in Algeria that caused a lot of trouble with starvation and with just general political malaise and problems in Algeria itself. And the Algerian people felt that since they just contributed a bunch of money and a bunch of people and a bunch of goods, right, and the lives of their people to the war effort for the France, for the French, for France, right, that the French government had a duty to some extent to, as a colony, right, help them out when going got tough, right. But the French governments in place and the officials in Algeria didn't do that. The French people in Algeria more or less hoarded the grain and the resources France sent to themselves, either sold it in the black market and got personally wealthy, or deprived individuals who were not indigenous peoples there, because like a lot of the people in Algeria were part or left over or had colonized it as part of the Islamic conquest in the latter half of like this, between the 6th century AD and like the 1200s, right? So like the indigenous people in Algeria is not really a thing, but the Arab population, who were the main inhabitants of Algeria, right, who were not French, who were there when the French got there as a colonial empire, right, were denied a lot of access to the same kind of support services and food and grain and governmental help that the French people there got, right? And so there was a lot of anger against the French on the part of the Algerian Arabic population because of the inequities in the distribution of food and the starvation that was forced on the Algerian people that the French didn't endure nearly as much, right? And a lot of French bureaucrats and governmental employees and like mayors, or they call them caids, C-A-I-D, is like a mayor or like a colonial viceroy, right? The governmental official in charge of that section of Algeria, right? Misdistributed for personal gain, or sold on the black market, or hoarded for themselves a great deal of the food, while the populations that they were supposed to take care of, both French and Algerian native, suffered and starved, right? And so there's a lot of bad crap going on there that Camus detects, is not being discussed in the halls of parliament, the French government, and legislature, and that the French people are not hearing about in the French media at the time. And so he goes to Algeria for 3 weeks, tours the country, goes, to the coastal country, the big cities, the farmlands, and the interior, the southlands, mountains and plains and valleys and deserts and everything, right, as much as he can, and meets individuals who are experiencing these famines, meets rebels, meets radicals, meets governmental officials, right, talks to all of them he can, and then tries to record in a series of articles he's sending back to France for these kind of political magazine publications or newspaper articles, right? His, as much as he can, say an objective opinion of what's going on in Algeria, as well as his suggestions personally and philosophically for a potential solution or a call to action, at least on the part of the French people. So it's interesting because he's not a politician, right? He's an academic, a philosopher, a novelist, an author. Won a Nobel Prize for literature. He's one of the first like modern existentialist philosophers, but he's taking on these political dimensions and these journalistic tasks because he feels compelled to do it for the sake of the people of Algeria. And he's an Algerian native. He was born in Algeria, though he's a French citizen, right? His parents lived in the colony of the province of Algeria. And so he feels some responsibility to and some duty to the Algerian people to represent them in France, but nobody else is hearing them, right? And so that's his background and how this came about. And I think it's interesting because, like I said, he's writing about political policy issues, but he's not a policymaker. He's not a journalist, right? So he's writing about them in these kind of like novelistic, philosophical, interesting kind of ways that seem, to me at least, and maybe I'm a nerd. Well, I'm definitely a nerd, but maybe it's just because of that. Way more interesting than like an article you'd read on Brookings.com.edu or on Cato Institute or in the New York Times, right? It seems a lot more literary and I guess, substantive to me. So yeah. So let's look at chapter 5 for all of you who are following along at home or on the screen here. The political future. All right. And I think it's funny how he also has a lot of humility, right? He's like, I'm not an expert. Like, the people who don't know Algeria, well, like, let me tell you about Algeria and the prejudices that go on there, right? He has kind of a humble conversational tone to some extent, right? He's not a pompous jackass philosopher who's like, well, all you people who don't have degrees from college, do you even know what you're talking about, right? So if you're the hardback or the paperback, it's chapter 5, the political future we're at. Okay, without pretending to be a distinguished economist, I would like to consider in purely commonsensical terms what political, economic, and social future one might see for Kabila, which is the capital of Algeria, major city, right? I have said enough about the misery of this region, but one cannot simply describe such distress without saying something about what response is called for. So, right, so he's saying like, oh, here's all the bad crap that's going on, right? But there's a policy solution that's needed, right? I can't just say, oh man, this place is really bad and stuff sucks without actually trying to offer a solution. Like, it's not ethical of me to say, man, this is so crap, everybody's all miserable, but I don't know what to fix about it. Like, just it's clickbait then, right? Or like early pre-click clickbait, right? I would also like to say something about the method. In the face of such an urgent situation, we must act quickly, and it would be foolish to contemplate a utopian scheme or advocate for impossible solutions. That is why each of the suggestions below starts not with risky principles, but with experiments that have already been tried and are currently underway in the region. And of course, nothing in this story is invented. Everything is taken from reality. A talented speaker recently put it, in politics, there are no copyrights. My goal is to help a friendly people, and the only purpose of these proposals is to serve that goal, right? So it kind of flips the script on the whole like theoretical political policy thing, right? Instead of like, oh, we should have a utopian society, or like, you know, the rich people should pay their fair share and that'll work out okay. Or we're gonna like tariff everything, like just like kind of these bold, universal policy proposal positions, rather like we're gonna cut off all exports or cut off all immigration or cut off all military endeavors, right? It's like, well, that might work maybe, but it's a theory. It'll never happen in reality, right? He's like, let's look at what's actually going on the ground, what's actually been tried, and try to develop a workable policy solution from the reality that exists, right? Which seems, like he says, commonsensical and not what other people usually tend to do. All right. So one must start from the principle that if anyone can improve the lot of the Kabils, change has to begin with the Kabils themselves. 3/4 of the population lives under the mixed regime, village chieftain system. Many other writers have criticized this political form, which bears only a distinct resemblance to democracy, and I will not repeat their criticisms here. The abuses due to the system have been abundantly documented, but even within the framework of these mixed communes, the Kabils now have an opportunity to demonstrate their administrative skills, right? So we're saying like there's like a sort of hereditary chieftain system that kind of has some democratic elements in it, that people can like vote or have a voice in the system, right? But their leader is not elected. He's like a hereditary chieftain of the tribal leader from whenever back in the day when it was founded, right? So it's a mixed democratic, you know, authoritarian, well, not authoritarian, like monarchic, like birthright system, right? So with the law of April 27th, 1937, a generous legislature opened the possibility of transforming certain Algerian douars into, which are like community farms, right, into communes run by the native population, under the supervision of a French administrator. Several experiments of this sort have been carried out in Arab and Kabyle regions. If these attempts are deemed successful, then there is no reason to delay extending the douar commune system. As it happens, an interesting experiment is underway right now in Kabyle, and I want to see it for myself. Since January 1938, the douar Amaoulis, a few kilometers from Fort National, has been operating a douar commune under the leadership of Mr. Hajardis. Thanks to his kindness and intelligent competence, I was able to observe the operation of this douar in person and document its achievements. The Anomalous douar includes 18 villages and a population of 1,200. A town hall was built in the geographical center along with several additional buildings. This town hall is like any other town hall, but the residents of the douar has the advantage of allowing them to complete administrative formalities without extensive travel. In May 1938, the town hall issued no fewer than 517 administrative documents to citizens of the commune, and the same year it facilitated the immigration of 515 Kabils. Right? With a minimal budget of 200,000 francs, the Ministry of Municipality, staffed by Kabyle officials elected by Kabyle voters, has resided for the past year and a half with an indigenous community in which complaints are rare.
For the first time, Kabyles are dealing with officials whose work they can monitor and whom they can approach to talk things over rather than merely obey in silence, right? So what they're saying is like, even though it's like a commune farm that has a administrator, right? Like the people actually kind of have a place to voice their grievances and vote, not vote necessarily, but like address issues, right? And there are administrative documents that are being issued, meaning that, okay, there's a proclamation or a regulation that's put forward, like you can't, I don't know, graze cattle on somebody else's cabbage patch because that would be terrible for the cabbage they're trying to harvest, right? Or you can't, if you want your neighbor's land, you can't go out and behead them and freaking just take their land. That'd be against the commune rules, right? Or like you can't just like let your freaking, the plot you're communally farming go to seed because you want to go get drunk instead, or like go to Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart and freaking fly in an airplane, right? And not do your work, right? Like you have to actually have responsibility in the commune. There's documents that support this. And so because these are publicly available documents, right, there's an accountability system that happens there, right? Or not elected officials, but the officials who are in charge now have to face public scrutiny because everything that happens is actually a public document, not like a diktat of like, oh, I'm the chieftain of this town, like you do what I say or else, right? And so there's a level of transparency and quasi-democratic operations happening there the same way as would happen in a town or a city, like where you have an elected mayor and stuff, right? And so he's saying like this is something he's experienced and witnessed himself, and it seems to be a pretty cool thing, right? So the point of this, if you're looking at it from a public policy proposal standpoint, right, is that this would be what we call like a case study, right? Like you have some, for example, if you like want to put forward a public policy for like universal health care, right? America's never done that, not even close to successfully, right? But like, been touted a lot or promoted a lot. But you could look at a country that has universal health care already, right? And like, what does the tax rate look like for the rich, for the middle class, for the poor? How much of the income is kept? What is their healthcare spending like? What is their drug costs like, right? And so you could look at that kind of a scenario and say, okay, so let's look at like Finland, say, right? Like Finland, the marginal tax rate for people who are middle class, right, is like 68%. For rich people, it's like 52%, right? So like that would mean in America, if you're earning less than $200,000 a year, right, like 68% of that, meaning like over half of your income, like almost 2/3 of your income, right, would go to pay the taxes necessary to have a universal healthcare system that's fully funded by the government, right? And so proposals that are say like we're just going to tax the rich or the 1% or whatever, right? That doesn't work. Like if you were to do that, if you were to tax them 99% of their income, right, and leave them with like $50,000 a year left, and that's it, right? That still is not enough because there's not enough of them to fund a fully federalized universal healthcare system that was paid for by the government, right? So you look at countries that have that done, they tax everybody over 50%. Like it doesn't matter if working at McDonald's or you have a paper route, right? If you have a paper route or making like $800 a month, 50% of it is still taxed to fund the healthcare system, right? There's no way around that. And so that's called like a case study, right? Even though like the United States hasn't done it, you can say, well, here's how it has to work other places. Like we can see more or less what would fall out here. We could do things a little differently here, maybe make it not so much, whatever, right? But like more or less the numbers that make it effective or not effective don't lie. And so the same thing here, like you have an example of a smaller commune that's working with 1,200 people and 18 villages and these farm units, right? Camus trying to use this as an example for what could be promoted as a national policy, right? And case studies have the advantage of saying, not only is this a good idea in theory, like, okay, we could have a utopia where everybody loves each other and is fed, and so nobody has to steal or murder or harm anyone, right? Like, that could work, right? But like, it's never been pulled off, and so it's only a theory. But this is a practical application. Like, this has happened, so it has more traction, right, than like, just like the John Lennon song or whatever, right? That's an ideology, it's not a policy per se. All right. So the Kabyles quite rightly attach considerable value to these changes, right? That they have the ability to voice complaints and have them addressed by the administration that are members of their own ethnic minority, right? One therefore cannot be too careful in criticizing recent experiments. Mr. Hadjartes has nevertheless proposed certain improvements which strike me as reasonable. To date, voters have been obliged to vote for the slates of candidates, with the winning slate then electing its own president. So it's kind of like a parliamentary system, right? Like you happens in Israel in elections, or in Britain or in Ireland, right? Where you vote for the representatives, right? And then whoever party gets the most representatives, right? That party comes together and chooses its president. You don't ever vote for the president or the vice president. You vote for like only your state reps or whatever, and then whoever gets the most, what party gets the most state reps, gets to then choose the administration from within its ranks, right? Which is kind of shady because like you don't know who's going to be the actual president when you vote for him. Also, like people's parties change a lot. So all of a sudden you have somebody who was in one party last year, who's in another party this year, and you vote for the same guy, and all of a sudden you have a different administration that supports a whole idea that you don't even think was on the table because you thought he was like a labor guy, and now he's actually like a conservative religious guy. Like who knows, right? So that's extrapolating more than Camus saying here, right? But the system is similar to that happens in Israel and Ireland and in Britain, right? And Italy, I believe, too. All right. So the Douar retains its traditional Cade, however, and remains under the supervision of the colonial administrator. So the governor from France, right, the Cade, is overseeing all this stuff too, right? The respective functions of the three officials, the president of the commune, Cade, and administrator, are not clearly defined, and it'll be useful to clarify and delineate them. Furthermore, the experiments with the Douar commune system have provoked a number of protests, whose motives I will not discuss, and elicit a number of criticisms that call for further examination. A recent series of articles argue that Douar was an artificial administrative unit, and that the creation of Douar communes risked bringing together villages and factions with opposing interests. In most cases, this is simply not true, although it does sometimes happen. In any case, the same arises of our series of articles proposed establishing a native rule at the level of the village rather than the Douar, and this is a very bad idea. For one thing, most villages have very little, if any, resources. There are villages, for instance, whose only common property is a single ash or fig tree. For another, there are far too many Kabyle villages to allow an adequate level of administrative supervision. To be sure, it would be a good idea to group villages that share a common geographical and cultural situation. Perpetuating old divisions in a mixed communal framework would result in administrative complications that are best avoided, right? So saying like you have Douars or groups of people, right, who are Muslim, right? You have some who are Christian, you have some who are animist or pagan, right? And like, it'd be silly to say, okay, like, we're just going to randomly group this section of the country, which is pagan and Muslim and Christian, under one administrative government, right? Who then has to deal with the cultural beliefs and practices of all three of these different sectarian religions, right? And somehow make everybody happy. He's like, it'd make much more sense if we grouped them like according to cultural background, right? And geographic location. So if there's like a bunch of Christian villages over here, it'd be better to have them, you know, under one Douarship as like a county, let's say, would be what it is in the U.S., right? And have a Muslim county over here and a pagan animist county over here. So there's not people trying to represent and govern other individuals who have a different belief and value system than their own, right? Like it's harder to say. I mean, you can look at the same thing in the U.S., right? Like if you have people from Texas, generally speaking, right, or from like rural Texas, like if there's a governor, if the governor of California got to be in charge of like, I don't know, I guess Ector County, right? Like the Gavin Newsom from California would have a lot of different ideas about what's important and how to value things in society than probably the people in Ector County do on the whole, right? I'm sure there are some values that are similar in line because we're all Americans, right? But as far as like the level of government involvement, tax rates, freaking public improvements, municipalities, COVID restrictions, etc., right? There would not be a lot of seeing eye to eye. And to say then that somebody from like ways away with a different belief system than your own should be the one in charge of you, right? When there's more local people who know more of what you need and want and represent you better, right, would be a more equitable and tenable situation. Well, that's what he's essentially what he's arguing for here, right? Don't have people who have different geographical and cultural situations grouped together under one person who's making the policy for them, or there'll be a lot of people pissed off and you'll have like, conflict, generally speaking, right? All right. Therefore, it seems preferable to amend the existing legislation without changing the basic administrative framework. On this point, I can do no better than to summarize the plan that Mr. Hujjartis explained to me with remarkable lucidity. Essentially, his plan comes down to extending democracy at the Douar commune level and introducing a kind of proportional representation. If the goal is to avoid conflicts of interest, Mr. Hujjartis is of the opinion the best way to do this is to allow all interests to be expressed. He therefore proposes that voters no longer be asked to vote for a slate of candidates. Instead, each village should elect its own representatives. These representatives would then come together to form a municipal council and would elect its own president. In this way, competition among villages within a Douar would be eliminated. In addition, village elections would be based on the proportional representation, with each village entitled to only one representative for every 800 citizens. In this way, intra-village rivalries would also be eliminated. As a result, the Jima of Amawalis would be reduced from 20 members to 16. Finally, Mr. Hujjartis envisions the transformation of all communes into communes of all the Douars of the mixed commune of Fort National, along with the creation of a single budget combining all available resources, which would then be shared amongst Douars in proportion of their needs and population. This would establish a small federal or federative, federal in the United States, right, republic in the heart of the Kabyle territory, a republic inspired by deeply democratic principles. As I listened to the president, Romales, I appreciated his remarkable lucidity and common sense, which might well serve as an example to many of our democratic officials. In any case, I've set forth his proposal as he described it. I hope the administration will know how to put this to good use, right? So basically, the proposal here, right, is almost like the United States federal democracy in some senses, right? What you have is you have a village. So this is classroom is a village, right? And like all my 5 classes I teach, right, are each villages within the Dwar. The Dwar is my teaching schedule, right? And so we would elect one official from ourselves, has to be a member of our village, right, to represent us, right? And then from our village, we'd send that representative to the Dwar Council, and then each of my other class would have a representative elected from them, right? So there'd be 5 people in the Dwar Council, right? And those 5 people would vote from among them to elect one of them the president of all 5 classes, right? And so one of those 5 people would be president then, and that person would then represent the policy in like so say all the English classes would then have the same thing, right? So the president from our Dwar commune would represent us in the English class, like Fort National region, right? The larger, I guess, like regional government, right? And so that way, like we have our voice heard in a small, like if we don't like the guy who's like a guy goes to the freaking Dwar level, right, and like screws us over and does us wrong, right? Then we can freaking like unelect his ass or pull him back or beat the crap out of him and send somebody else when he's in the hospital, right? And so there's accountability in that regard, right? It's kind of modeled on sort of like the American system to some extent, right? Except for the representatives are directly elected at the local level, right? Like you have to be a member of the village, and it's all just a basic common vote for us to who goes that way. Whoever goes out then is like voted on by that group, and so there's kind of like a winnowing down that happens, right? But at least we have accountability in that degree. Is what he's saying. So like this, in a lot of ways, right, is itself a pretty big policy proposal, right? Like this is a reorganizational proposal for the government of Algeria and how it would work at a local and regional level, right? But it's not written as freaking like a bunch of statistics and crazy stuff. Like it's pretty, I mean, some of it's kind of in the weeds a little bit with the way it's worded, but it's not so in the weeds you can't understand it, right? Like he's kind of, he makes a lot of sense, even though the words are like Dejima and Onamelis and like, you know, the terms are French and Algerian terms, not like state and, you know, senator and whatever. But, and anyways, that's an example of a public policy proposal he's making in pretty good commonsensical terms, right? All right. Does somebody else want to read this paragraph here? I can zoom in if it helps. My voice is getting a bit tired. I want to hear some of y'all voices. Want me to zoom in a bit, y'all? You got, is this, I mean, how big this is? Is that better? A little bit? Oh, you got the book. Oh, yeah, here's good. Get it on. That. Thank you. So what I basically is saying is like, there's a lot of people who are like holding out for the old commune or the whole Dwar structure, right? Which says like the French administrators are the ones in charge, right? And there's no democratic or locally indigenous or native people elected for office, right? It's just a top-down administrative colonial system. I mean, they say, well, look at all the money that's coming through here, right? Like we have to keep this money going, and maybe the freaking natives would not mess up the markets and not be able to handle it the way our like proper French bureaucrats are doing, right? He's like, well, if the two are in conflict, you have to hopefully, you have to favor sacrificing the French administrative control in favor of the people running it themselves, because otherwise, like, it's not sustainable. You have to keep the people in repression and suppression and oppression, right, to keep some revenue coming, or like maybe risk losing a little bit of revenue and let the people run their own damn markets, because otherwise it's not going to work really, right, on a longer term, right? And even in places where, and the people who are like French citizens, 100 French voters at the center, right, like they might be pissed and people might be mad at them, but like let people be mad at them and let them like lose some of their power, right, so that the thousands of people around them actually have some kind of a stake in the game, right? Which I think is not an unreasonable position, right? In any case, such a generous policy would clear the way for the administrative emancipation of Kabila. To achieve that goal, it is enough today to really want it. It can be pursued in parallel with material assistance to this unfortunate region. We have made enough mistakes along the way to be able to benefit from the lessons that failure always has to teach. For instance, I know a few arguments more specious, meaning like flawed, stupid, vapid, right, than that of personal status when it comes to extending political rights to natives. But when applied to Kabila, the argument becomes ridiculous because it was we French who imposed a personal status on the Kabyles by Arabizing their country with the Cade system and introducing the Arabic language. It ill behooves us today to reproach the Kabyles for embracing the status we imposed on them. That the Kabyle people are ready for greater independence and self-rule was obvious to me one morning when, after returning from Amalis, I fell into conversation with Mr. Hajardis. We had gone into the gap in the mountains through which one could see the vast extent of our douar that had stretched all the way to the horizon. My companion in the various villages for me and explained what life was like in each one. He described how the village imposed solidarity on each of its members, forcing all residents to attend every funeral in order to make sure that the poor man's burial was no less imperative than the rich man's. He also told me that banishment from the community was the worst possible punishment which no one could bear. As we looked down on the vast sun-baked land from a dizzying height, the trees resembled clouds of vapors steaming up from the hot soil. And I understood what bound these people to one another and made them cling to their land. I also understood how little they needed in order to live in harmony with themselves. So how could I fail to understand the desire to take charge of their own lives and their hunger to become at last what they truly are, courageous, conscientious human beings from whom we could humbly take lessons in dignity and justice, right? I mean, that's a pretty moving paragraph, right? Like it's only like almost like a nature poem, right? He's like talking about how he looks down this valley and like the people are like their solidarity is beautiful and how the guy knows how each people in each of the freaking towns lives, right? I mean, it's a little communistic, right? It's a little bit like, people are made to do all this stuff because you can't respect the rich man more than the poor man, right? But like in a farming community, right, or an agricultural community, this is how it works generally, right? Like this is how, like if y'all are familiar with Quaker communities or Amish communities or Mennonite communities in the United States at all, right? Kind of anti-technological, rural, do everything by hand, no machines kind of communities in the U.S., right? It's the same thing, right? When somebody in the community gets married, right? They only have allow 2 or 3 marriages a year, because when somebody gets married, the community all come together and build the married couple a house and build them all by hand the furniture for their house, right? And so there is something about like investment, not financially, but like labor in a community, right? That happens in a lot of these places where life is not metropolitan or technologically connected. It's all about the survival and the good of the community, which is an interesting kind of scenario. So, yeah, but I think it's a very persuasive way to word if people are interested in like how to word their public policy in a convincing way, right? This could not, you have to do this again. We're past that assignment now, but this would be an interesting place to look at for parodying some language or some rhetoric to hype up the call to action at the end of your policy, right? All right. So there's some footnotes there that just talks about personal status. So the personal status law, right? The footnote on that comes from the Arabic, the Iberian conquest and the Arabic conquest in the 12 to 1300s, which preceded the Crusades, right? So I guess it began really in 800. It got to North Africa and they really conquered North Africa in 1138, I believe. I could be wrong about that date. But because the French came in, we're we'll keep going and institute this Arabic, or not as Arabic, this Islamic, but Arabic ethnically system of power and privilege, right? That individuals who have are landed aristocracy or have higher religious calling or status, right, are privileged and have more rights and legal rights that are defensible in ways that the people who are native are not, right? So in Islamic society, a lot of times you have what's called, this is my own footnote to this, right? You have what's called the al-Darum al-Harb, which is like the people, all the people in the world who are not Muslim, who have not converted to Islam, which means the world of war, right? Those who are at conflict with the state of Islam, right? You have al-Darum al-Islamiyah, which is like the Muslim world. And so you have then a thing called the Jizya, which is the status of people who are not Muslim. And there's not access to the same kind of Kanun Sharia rights, which are like the religiously instituted rights for people who are followers of the Prophet, right? And so there are different legal systems that are set up. You have only access to some rights of lawsuits and civil law if you're a member of the Islamic community, right? So if you're a pagan or an animist indigenous person from Algeria, you can't petition for protection from an Islamic court. So somebody could come and like ransack your bread shop or your freaking your cart or take your tools or whatever, your plowshares, and if they were a Muslim, right, from one of the status families, then you can't go to a Muslim court and petition for redress or for them to be punished or for them to return your stuff, because you can't speak in front of that court because you don't have rights in front of that court. You can go to a lower level court, but the thing is the lower level court has no jurisdiction over members of the Islamic community. So it's like a dual system, right, where if you're part of this class of people or this religion of people, you can't petition for anything that's done to you by the upper class, right? And so that's what he's talking about the status here, right? Is that the French were kind of like, we'll just keep rolling with that. Like, don't mess with the dual law system between Arabic Islamic individuals and the native pagan individuals, right? And so he was like, that was stupid for us to do. Like, that was a mistake. Like, we shouldn't have created like a dual system of law. We should have the same kind of representation and rights for everybody, right? That'd be better. Yeah, so that's a little bit of background on what that is and how that came about and why he's talking about that. And then so there's also, and then like he says to in the footnote, like the three statuses, right, are like the French nationals, who are French citizens, or they're administrating stuff, right, who are above the Islamic individuals and their court of law, right, because they're French and have the French government behind them, and then the Islam, and then the pagan or the animist are like below them. So there's like a 3-tier system, really, but like the biggest, most powerful people are like the French minority who are like the colonial, viceroys or governors who are put there in charge of whole sections of the freaking country. And they're just kind of like the Cades and the jackasses who are like, I'm taking all the grain. Here's a little bit. I'm going to sell on the black market, get rich, and buy I don't know, 1940 or 36. You couldn't buy like a Bentley or anything. Buy something, maybe like a Jeep or like that stuff from Indiana Jones. Austin Martin, right? Yeah. All right. So the economic and social future. All right, Kabila has too many people and not enough grain. Like, that's a pretty easy way to state a freaking famine problem, right? Like, Camus a lot of times has some really like plain ass language that's like, wow, that really is just the problem, isn't it? Like, the Titanic had too many people and not enough lifeboats. All right, too many icebergs and not enough hold, right? It consumes more than it produces. Its labor, compensated with ridiculously low wages, is not sufficient to pay for what it consumes. Its emigres, whose numbers dwindle year after year, can no longer make up for this trade deficit. If we want to return Kabila to prosperity, save its people from famine, and do our duty towards the Kabila people, we must therefore change everything about the region's economy. So we get like, this is going to be a big policy proposal here, but we're going to change an entire economy. We have to somehow change it, right? There's the problem is that crap ain't working. Everybody's got low wages. People are starving because the grain production is not good, right? There's famine, no prosperity, and people are leaving the region, right? Nobody's coming there. And people who come there are like people are leaving the region, they're immigrating, right? And people who emigrate, the immigrate means immigrants, people who come to a place, right? Are not very many, right? So people are coming to bring new citizenship and money and trade, right? There's like very few of them now. So there's no wealth coming in or labor coming in either, right? All right, common sense suggests that the Kabila consumes more than it produces. Must find a way to increase the purchasing power of the Kabila people so the wages of their labor can compensate for the shortages of their production. Must also try to reduce the gap between imports and exports by increasing the latter as much as possible, right? So basically saying that if people who are there don't have enough money to pay the workers, right, then the workers aren't going to have enough money to buy food. If food's really expensive and you're getting no money, you can't buy food, you're going to starve and you can't work, right? So there's a shortfall in the economic system, right? So what we need to do is reduce the amount of stuff that's being exported, right? So they can get more money in the system, paying people more money to buy stuff, right? That's what he articulates. All right, these are the main lines of policy that everyone agrees is essential. The two aspects of this policy must not be separated, however. There is no way to raise the standard of living in Kabila without paying people more and paying more for their products. It is not just humanity that is trampled underfoot when people are paid 6 francs for a day of their work. It's also logic. And the low prices paid for Kabila's cash crops are an affront not only to justice, but also to common sense. In this essay, I will review a number of the constant themes of this inquiry. Kabila labor is paid as it is only because of the unemployment and the latitude allowed by to employers. Wages will therefore not become normal until unemployment has been reduced, competition in the labor market has been eliminated, and tariffs have been restored. So this is very quickly stating, right, a different kind of economic system than we have in the United States, right? These same problems occur in the United States, right? And they're related economically no matter where you're at, right? But the solution here is something that we wouldn't really consider necessarily in the United States, I don't think, right? So you're saying labor is paid crap, right? Because unemployment is really high. So if there's like 50% unemployment and everybody wants a job, so anybody will take crap wages for whatever job they get, right? You'll take 6 francs a day, which I don't know what that converts to, probably like $1.30 or something, right? For a day's worth of work. But since you're one of the only 50% of people who has a job, you're happy to have that job, right? And because of that, if you don't like, if you want to earn a little bit more, or you like think it's crap wages, they'll just fire you and hire somebody else who'll take that wage, right? Because there's a lot of people looking for work at all, right? So he wants to somehow end unemployment, right? And allow or stop allowing employers to just fire whoever, whenever, and just to get a lower wage worker in there, right? Because if you end unemployment and then you add or you in competition in the labor market, meaning that like you can't go fire you and get somebody else for the same cheaper wage, right? Then wages will stabilize or raise, right? Because you can't just fire you and get somebody for cheaper. So, and then tariffs are restored, right? So the question is like, just from a common sense point of view, is how is that going to work? Like how, I mean, you could just say, okay, we're going to like, you can't fire anybody anymore and you have to pay people this amount of money. But there's freaking imports or whatever, right? You're not, or exports, and you're trying to import all your food. It seems like it seems like the math doesn't add up at some point, maybe, right? Let's see what he says about the next point. But I think that's something I'm like, okay, this would be good. And this is then like, he says it's pragmatic, but it seems kind of theoretical almost, right? Like, it'd be great if we could end labor freaking disputes and competition, raise wages to a sustainable amount, right? And then implement tariffs again. Cool. But like, we're going to just like find a money tree or like, you know, golden El Dorado. Like, what are we going to do to make that actually happen? All right. So until labor inspectors are actually dispatched to Kabila, which they're not, so people live in horrible labor conditions, right? It is desirable the state employ as many workers as possible. Okay, here we go. Monitoring of the market will then be automatic. Unemployment must be reduced in 3 stages. First, by a program of public works. Second, by the establishment of a job training program. And third, by the organization of immigration. So this is questionable maybe, right? So the way that we're going to make sure that everybody gets a good wage and that they're employed and the working conditions are okay is all going to have government jobs, right? The government, the state needs to employ. So everybody's going to work for the post office or public works. I mean, if y'all know about the Great Depression, right? The whole public works projects, the whole like around national parks are created. You have guys out there, like 12 of them digging holes for 8 hours a day. And tomorrow another group of guys comes in and fills up the holes they dug, more or less, like kind of make labor jobs. But all government paid, so it's a stable, you know, wage or whatever. And apparently the conditions aren't so bad because the government can regulate itself. So the whole solution here is to eliminate the private market entirely, right? Have many people that can be government jobs as possible. We'll give them public works jobs to do, and then teach them how to code or whatever, right? After that, we'll stop or organize the immigration policies, right? So public works programs are, of course, part of every demagogic political platform. Demagogic meaning like demagogues. Means like up there like, oh, I want jobs for everybody, 2 chickens in every pot. Like we'll have a lot of people building statues of Saddam Hussein or whatever, right? Like Stalin had a great public works program, right? He's like, everybody build a statue of me and then like ride the trains and that's the Ukrainian gulags and like steal the grains from the Ukrainians. Good job, Soviet public works, right? And in fact, the Ukrainians starved and the statues were all like of Stalin, like was a side effect of that, right? So public works can be a misnomer for terrible things done for the government as well, right? But anyways, but the essence of demagogy, I can't read, demagogy is that programs are proposed but never implemented. Here the goal is opposite. So like, I'm going to make we have a lot of people in this last presidential campaign, right? Put America back to work. You know, freaking all the jobs, manufacturing coming back. Your coal jobs are coming back. Oil jobs are coming back. Everybody's going to, and the whole point he's saying is like, demagogues promise all that shit, right? But never actually mean for it to happen because it's impossible. He's saying like, here's the opposite is the plan, is that we're gonna promise a lot of government jobs, right, and actually give more jobs than we promised. Like the goal is not to promise people shit you ain't gonna give them; it's to give them shit you didn't even promise, but still government jobs, right? To undertake public works in a country that has no need of them is indeed a waste of public funds, right? Like we have nice highways and stuff. We're like, hey, we're gonna pay everybody much money to go demolish our highways and build new ones over. Not a good use of funding, right? But need I point out how sorely Kabila lacks both roads and water? Not only would a major public works program eliminate the bulk of unemployment and raise wages to a normal level, it would also yield a surplus economic value for Kabila, and sooner or later, we would reap the benefits. This policy has already been initiated, where it is systematically pursued in the commune of Port Goiden and the douar of Beni Yeni, and the results were immediately apparent. Port Goiden now boasts of 17 new fountains and a number of new roads. Beni Yeni is one of the wealthiest douars in Kabila, and its workers are paid 22 francs a day. All right, so I think it's kind of just funny. He's like, look, we got 17 new fountains and a bunch of new roads. Like, maybe the roads don't go anywhere. Maybe they go in a big circle. Maybe the fountains are like, I mean, maybe they're great. I've never been there, right? But it's just funny how the systematic quantification of like public works projects is done. He's like, look, we got a bunch of new crap. Like, maybe like the economy's tanking. There's no exports because we're not farming anymore, making food. We're just like building fountains. And there's a drought, so there's no water in the fountains. But damn it, we got 17 new fountains. I mean, could be the way often it is promoted, right? The major criticism that one can make, however, is that these experiments remain isolated, and large amounts of public funds have been dispersed in small subsidies that have had virtually no effect. Government officials regularly ask, where are we to find the money? But for now, at least, the problem is not to come up with new funding, but just to use the money that has already been appropriated, right? Which is often the problem in the United States too, right? We got like freaking God knows, like a third of the budget for education, like $690 billion for education, public schools in the U.S. from the federal government, not including state and local government, right? And like that should be enough to like pay teachers a ton of money with benefits and buy supplies, whatever. But somehow, by the time it goes from that down to the states and local, and even with the local tax funding and property taxes in there, right? Like there's no money left. Like, how's that happen? Right? Usually because the bureaucracy siphons off a lot of money at every level and pays like $45 for a private contractor for every roll of toilet paper they buy, right? Because the brother owns a toilet paper company or whatever, right? So the corruption and levels of bureaucracy tends to eliminate the amount of appropriated funds that actually go to people in the real world. In America, at least. I'm not sure if that's the case here, but probably is, right? So nearly 600 million francs have been directed toward Kabila. It has now 10 days since I tried to describe the horrifying results. What I need now is an intelligent and comprehensive plan that can be systematically implemented. We want nothing to do with politics as usual and half measures and compromises, small handouts and scattered subsidies. Kabila wants the opposite of business as usual, namely smart and generous policy. It will take vision to pull all together the appropriated sums, scattered subsidies, and wasted charity if Kabila is to be saved by the Kabilas themselves. If the dignity of these peasants is to be restored to their useful labor paid a just wage. We managed to come up with the money to give the countries of Europe nearly 400 billion francs, all of which is now gone forever. It seems unlikely that we cannot come up with 1/100th that amount to improve the lot of people whom have not yet made French, but to be sure, for whom we demand the sacrifices of French citizens. We demand the sacrifice of French citizens, meaning like they've not been granted citizenship, they can't vote in France or whatever, right? But we draft people from their military from their population to be in the army, right? We make them pay taxes to the French government because they're colony, right? So we're saying like taxation without representation essentially is what we do. And we're like, well, why should we give them money? They're not French. Well, you already pulled from them as if they're French, right? All right. Furthermore, wages are so low only because the Kabila is not qualified for protection under existing labor laws. That is where job training for both industrial and agricultural workers comes in. There are occupational training schools in Kabila. In Michelet, there is a school for blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons. It has trained good workers, some of whom live in Michelet itself, but the school can only train a dozen students at a time, and that's not enough. There are also schools in arboriculture, like the one in Mistras. There you go. Mistras. But it graduates only 30 students every 2 years. This is an experiment, not an institution. These efforts must now be expanded, and every other center must be equipped with a vocational training school to train people whose skills and desire to assimilate are proverbial. All right. So basically, the policy is being promoted here, right? Is that okay? Like we have labor laws to protect French citizens, right? from freaking overworking, bad working conditions, and getting a bad wage, right, and abuse at work, right, or like hazardous conditions. But because the Algerian people in Kabyles aren't French citizens, they don't get any of that. We can do whatever we want to them. They're like they don't have rights under the working conditions, right? Not only that, but like we've given Europe a ton of money in the war, right? As well as like helping Germany rebuild itself after we beat their ass in the war, right? Helping them like get back on their feet and have economic development, right? And giving money for what would be the League of Nations at this time, right? Not the UN yet, right? Donating money and troops to that. And so, you know, like why can't we give these people who actually contributed to the war effort as opposed to the Germans who we fought in the war to help develop their economy? Why don't we give some money to the people who helped us fight the war to have them not die in starvation and poverty, right? So that seems like, and not a too far-fetched policy proposal, as well as the idea that like, okay, so we're giving a bunch of money and subsidies and grants to like the people in Kabila, right? But at the same time, it's all going to waste because it's like a couple bucks for this, couple bucks for that. It's like, let's go ahead and get everything back together, like pull all that money back, get into a fund and like establish colleges and training schools that actually train people, right? We got like 2 trade schools that train like a total of 32 people every 2 years. Like, that's cool. But for a country of like 9 million people, right? Or a jurisdiction of 9 million people, that's not really going to do a hell of a lot, right? We need to have more people with training and in farming and arboriculture and everything, right, to help out with making the country better as a whole. All right. Okay, we'll read one last section, I think. Yeah. All of Kabila's problems are related, moreover. There is no better illustration of this than the fact that there is no point training skilled workers if they cannot find jobs. For now, however, all the jobs in the metropolitan France. So no training policy, something is done to help the Kabyles emigrate, meaning move to France, right? To that end, the first thing to do is simplify the formalities. And the second is to assist with immigration. Right now, it's possible to help the Kabyles find jobs in farming. I'm not speaking of the offers coming from the Niger office. There is no point in sending Kabyle peasants to die for the benefit of private firms in the lethal foreign environment. But the colonial authorities could still distribute the nearly 200,000 hectares of land in Algeria if they choose to. And Kabyle itself, an experiment of this type is underway in the Boimani estates. Meanwhile, people are fleeing the south of France, and we had to bring in tens of thousands of Italians to colonize our own soil. Today, those Italians are returning home. There's no reason why Kabyles cannot colonize this region. We are told that the Kabyles are too attached to their mountains to leave them. My answer is, first of all, that there are presently 50,000 Kabyles in France who already left those same mountains. In addition, I would mention the response of one of our Kabyle peasants to whom I put the question. You are forgetting that we do not have anything to eat. We have no choice. I anticipate the next objection. But these Kabyles will eventually abandon their land and return home. This may well be true, but is there anyone who does not see that the Kabyles have been coming to France generation after generation, and that no landowner will leave his land until he has sold it to someone younger than himself? In any case, these few measures suffice to raise the wages of the Kabyles workers to a decent level. Right? So he's saying, like, back in the day when like we had plenty of food in the mountains, right? The Kabyles in the mountain regions didn't have a reason to like want to leave the mountains because they were not starving, right? Like there was a bunch of land in Algeria that needed to be colonized. They wanted people on it to occupy it. So people in Niger, the country neighboring it, right, didn't like conquer it or like take the land, right? Because it was part of French Algeria. And so they're like, hey, we need Italians to come immigrate here because like nobody else will move here. We don't want the Nigerians to come in and take it over, right? And so now, because there's a famine, all the Italians have left. Well, the famine and the war. Like we just got over a war while Italy and France were not on speaking terms, really, right? So Italians go back to Italy so as not to be prosecuted or like found to be seditious and executed in French Algeria, right? Or sent to like Devil's Island in South America because they're spies, right? And so Italians have left. There's open land here, right? And instead of that, the French are trying to take Kabylite workers, right, and send them to Niger to work on private, like French-owned farms in Niger, or like as mercenary farmers who like more or less get killed in Nigerian civil wars, right? He's like, we should stop wasting people's lives here to send them to like this private, like I don't know, like a for-profit farming contracting service that's like no one else gets people killed in a foreign country, right? And have the people who are sending to do that go to the farms the Italians have left in like the 200,000 acres of land that are now open and unfarmed in Algeria. Everybody's like, well, like, why would we do that? The Kabyles love their mountains. They're mountain people. Like, why would anybody from freaking, I don't know, from West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains want to move to Texas, right? There's no mountains there, or at least like here, right? Like, well, if they're starving in West Virginia because they have no food because of the drought, there's nothing to freaking do and no jobs, but there's jobs in the oil field here, probably people would move from West Virginia to Texas to work in the oil field and not starve to death, right? Like, well, what happens when the famine's over? Won't they want to move back? Well, maybe. But if you actually let them own that land, right, don't just make them indentured servants, but actually give that land to the people. Like if you own a house in Odessa, right, even if you want to go back to the mountains in West Virginia because it's dry and like sad, and whatever, and dusty out here, and like flat, right? Like if you buy a house here or given a house here, right, you're probably not going to leave until you've either given that house to one of your offspring, right, or freaking sold it for at least some money so you can go back and buy a house in West Virginia, right? Like the same thing applies, like common sense. Like if you give somebody some land and they're farming it, right, they're not going to be like, oh, I want to go to the mountains. F this land I've worked so long on and it has value. I could actually get money for it, leave it to my next generation, right? He's like, people wouldn't do that. That's a stupid argument. Well, that's right, because human interest dictates different. So yeah, that's sufficient for today. We're out of time anyways. Yeah, but we'll do more Algerian Chronicles at the next class. If you haven't done the course evaluations, please do it so the percentage complete goes to 100 and they stop yelling at me. Not yelling at me, they're just like, hey, make sure you remind your students. Hey, make sure you remind. Hey, make sure you remind your students. So people on TV land in the line, do the course evals if you haven't, please. If you know somebody who hasn't done it, your roommate, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your Parcheesi partner, your tennis opponent has not done it, do it now. Okay. Take care, everybody. If y'all turn it out, or whenever y'all turn in outlines, I'll begin giving you feedback on those directly. So if you have them in, cool. The ones that are in, I've commented on and sent feedback back. So get them in there. And we're going to do a peer review exercise with the checklist on Monday. So make sure your outlines, at least, if not like the draft thing, right, post outline, is done. If it's not done, don't hide away and don't come to class because it's not done. Come to class without it done. I won't shame you publicly, right? But like, just do as much as you can. Have as much done as you can, okay? All right. Take care, y'all. Have a great weekend. One class left in person, and that's it. What's up? All right. Yes. Damn it. Okay, it's okay. Oh, fine.